Tate Forsay would never get nervous about this game, Scott. But if he was at all nervous, perhaps, maybe his pinky toe was a little bit nervous about the game. Not even that should be nervous now. Ohio State secondary looks bad.
Well, I mean, Tate Forsay might not be nervous, but the rest of the Michigan football team still should be a little nervous. Ohio State's not a horrible football team, but they're a team that had a lot of flaws exposed on Saturday. This was not a game that was as close as the final score indicated. It was only an eight-point game, but Purdue more or less dominated the entire game until Ohio State got a late touchdown at the end. 4 turnovers from Ohio State. If I believe it was 2 interceptions by Terrell Pryor. David's right. He's really struggling throwing the football this year. And if this keeps up, Ohio State, you can't score 18 points against a team like Purdue and expect to contend for Big Ten championships. And that's what we're seeing with Ohio State. They're not as good a football team as they were sort of being made out to be.
Well, and you called it. And if we can go to that clip now, that would be great. Here we go. Season, I still think that could come to fruition. Scott is really enthusiastic, and Peter is fairly enthusiastic. But a win over Ohio State, I don't even know what I would do if that happened, guys. We'll start with you, Peter.
I would be arrested, first of all.
You would be arrested. That's probably right. That's for sure. I mean, I know Ohio State's look bad, but do you really think Michigan has a chance? I guess this exercise is Michigan a good team?
I have been. It's a little optimistic to say they're going 9-3. I'll admit that right off the bat. But Penn State's going to be very tough. But there's not a game on the schedule that they should lose. Wisconsin will be tough going to Camp Randall, but getting Ohio State at home is going to be a big benefit. It's going to be close. I think Michigan can. I see Michigan beating Ohio State. I really do.
I sense a smug look on Scott's face, but he was definitely
Maybe.
right. Maybe. Ohio State not as good as everyone thought. And now let's move on to this Iowa-Wisconsin game, guys. And we're going to start with you, David. You saw Iowa kind of mess around with Wisconsin for the first 3 quarters, just like they have in seemingly every other game, including against teams of the likes of Northern Iowa, but then pull out in the 4th quarter. Of course, the only undefeated team overall and in the Big Ten right now. Is there anything that's going to stop Iowa from getting that Rose Bowl berth?
Unfortunately, I don't think there is, and what it brings to mind for me is 2003 Ohio State team. Ricky Stanzi resembles Craig Krenzel almost to a T, and that defense has been pretty good for them. I mean, with the exception of the Michigan game, of course, but Michigan's given a lot of teams trouble on defense. I just don't see anybody in Iowa's way that's really going to, I mean, at Michigan State this week, I don't think that's going to be a problem for them.
We will see. Of course, Iowa has at Michigan State and at Ohio State as their 2 most difficult games left on their schedule, Scott. It seems conceivable that, especially in light of Ohio State's loss to Purdue, that Iowa runs the table.
It's conceivable. I would still peg Iowa as a 1-loss football team. I don't think they're going to run the table. But even so, a 1-loss football team could win the Big Ten. We were seeing the standings. It's very possible. You're right. Iowa's a team that just doesn't beat themselves. For whatever reason, they can just keep plugging along, and like we saw in that Michigan game, unfortunately, Iowa just plugged along and let Michigan beat themselves with all the turnovers. So Iowa's not a fantastic football team, but they're a team that can get the job done. And it's a lot like David was saying, a lot like some of the Ohio State teams from the past years where they kept playing ugly games but kept pulling out the victory. Iowa's reminding me a lot of those Ohio State teams. So I still think they'll lose a game. I don't think they'll be undefeated, but I mean, 11-1 is not a bad season at all.
No, certainly
especially
not.
for Iowa.
Yeah, certainly not. So if you're at the handicap Rose Bowl right now, guys, who's going? We'll start with you, David.
I don't know if it's a Big Ten team. I mean, I think that Iowa might make it all the way to national championship games, outlandish as that sounds.
Oh, no.
But,
oh, my
I mean,
gosh. Yeah.
if it is a team, it's Iowa, in my eyes.
Okay. And Scott?
Well, I just predicted Iowa to lose 1 game, and I've in the past predicted Ohio State to lose another game to Michigan, and I've picked I think Michigan State's going to lose another game. Obviously, I think they'll lose to Iowa this weekend. So if everything goes as planned, we could see Iowa and Penn State tied at the top with 1 loss. But tiebreaker, Iowa over Penn State a couple weeks ago. I think Iowa's going to the Rose Bowl, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it's not a controversial position to have. You know, Iowa with undefeated record tests against Michigan State at Michigan State and against Ohio State at Ohio State. But that's in that death of Iowa, Penn State, Michigan State to end the season for Ohio State. But the one-loss team, and of course Michigan with 2 losses is probably out of the picture. There'd have to be mass chaos for Michigan to sneak into a Rose Bowl, and they would have to win out. But that being said, the team with the easiest road to the Rose Bowl with only 1 loss is most certainly Michigan State. And I can hear the booing from the 5 or 6 viewers out there right now. But Iowa and Penn State are the only 2 tough games left, both at home. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but I'm just saying amongst the one-loss teams, they definitely have the easiest road to the Rose Bowl. We'll leave it at that. No one gets to say anything to that because we need to move on right now. Let's take a look at the BCS standings. They were released last week for the first time. We're bringing them into this show this week for the first time. And some interesting things going on here. Florida number 1, Alabama number 2. Of course, Florida eking out a win over Arkansas. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But Alabama actually jumped Florida in the AP poll on Florida's somewhat tepid performance against the Arkansas Razorbacks and everyone's favorite quarterback, Ryan Mallett. You see Iowa there at number 6, the last of the undefeateds in the BCS conference. TCU at number 8 lurking there. Miami, LSU, USC, all one-loss teams. And so let's just run down what's happened this past Saturday, guys. Let's start with Texas and Oklahoma. Sam Bradford hurts his shoulder again in the first quarter of this game. Texas ends up winning 16-13, Scott. Did this game do anything to convince you that Texas really deserves to be in this conversation with Florida and Alabama as the top 2 teams in BCS land?
I mean, they deserve to be in the conversation until they lose because they haven't lost yet and they've played some quality teams. But are they a team that will win the national title? I'd be very surprised because, Sam Bradford leaves the game and they still only win by 3. That doesn't do a lot to really instill confidence that Texas really is a fantastic football team. So, they got a decently difficult schedule still. They have to go at Oklahoma State. They have to go at A&M and Missouri, Texas A&M, a rivalry game. And then they're going to have to play a Big 12 title game. So it'll still be a difficult road. But until they lose, they deserve to be at least in the mix because they're not a horrible team.
Yeah, well, that Big 12 North is just 2 thumbs down and has been for a while now.
Yeah.
With the exception of the one Missouri-Kansas year, that was just so great. And then I apologize to Sam Bradford if he's sitting in a Michigan dorm right now because he's watched his shoulder get destroyed 5 or 6 times now. But I have a slightly different question for you, David, regarding Sam Bradford. Of course, wins the Heisman Trophy last year. Going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Now this season happens. He decides to come back for his senior season saying there's some unfinished business to attend to. Well, there certainly is now because he's not going to play probably the rest of the year. And he's not going to get a red shirt for this year, nor I think would he take it. It was a mistake for Sam Bradford to stay this year, to come back for his senior season.
I think everybody's going to look at it, and you almost have to draw the Matt Leinart comparisons. I mean, you skip being the number 1 pick or close to it, and next thing you know, you're out of the top 10, and maybe your pro career takes a big hit. With Sam Bradford, bad shoulder, there's going to be a lot of questions, and they might not go answer it until a couple of years through his career because he might not see the field, just as Matt Leinart hasn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunate turn of events certainly for Sam Bradford's pro prospects. Also unfortunate for Notre Dame fans this past weekend. Their loss to USC, another heart stopper. No Charlie Weiss pun intended right there. This time Notre Dame comes up short in the game. A game very, very similar to that 2005 Matt Leinart game, David, where Reggie Bush pushes Matt Leinart into the end zone and they grew out the grass to 10 feet tall or whatever ridiculous amount it was. Now, of course, we all know that these games are broadcast by NBC, and here's Golden Boy himself, Jimmy Clausen, Scott.